infidelity stories. Should you be new, kindly join our channel and like this video. Just a second is needed. Nevertheless, it inspires us to produce additional narratives, hence kindly enjoy this film. And now let me begin the narrative. I never reasoned I would find myself in this context. I grew up in a little town with aspirations of a basic, contented life. I married my darling from college, John, while we were neither young nor full of optimism. We did not have much, yet we shared, and that was either sufficient or so I. Looking forward, I can now see the indicators of what was approaching, but at that moment I couldn't have envisioned it. I met Mr. Thompson, our landlord. When John and I first migrated into the little cottage we rented, the house had little, but it was ours, had a somewhat garden with CO appeal, and a tiny yard I loved. John and I both found great excitement in this fresh chapter in our lives. Mr. Thompson was an elderly man in his early 60s who had a always cheerful, welcoming face, met with he was the sort of landlord that would visit once in a little to verify. Everything was in order with the residents I recall from his first visit. He was so fixing a broken fence. Courteous inquiries on our requirement for everything, and usually striking up casual conversation on how the neighborhood had transformed throughout the years. Back then, I gave it little thought. He was simply an amiable older man. Stuff gradually began to shift. Adam's employment took him more frequently out of town, and I discovered I now spend more time alone myself at the house. During these periods that I started to see Mr. Thompson in a different light. He would stop by sometimes more frequently than unannounced, to sometimes just to check on the house. At first, I considered it to be innocuous. Eventually, after all, he was our landlord, but with time I started to see something change. In our one afternoon's chats, revealed that I was landscaping in the backyard. Under Mr. Thompson halted at, he had been travelling. Over more often, and although I didn't mind his business, something related to his visits started to feel strange, always incredibly nice. But beneath, there was intensity to his focus that led me to unstable on that specific afternoon he stayed. Longer than normal, we discussed the weather, the yard, and finally roughly life it was. In those times when I started to feel something different. Enthusiasm in his, "Your attitude makes me happy here." He asked me that day, staring at me in a way that made me rather vulnerable. I wasn't sure. Obviously, I was delighted with the response. John, but I had begun to experience a space between us, particularly with his long labour hours at the office, occasionally revealed moments when, even at his house, I felt alone. However, I didn't wish to tell Mr. Thompson that. Not vocally. I nodded and grinned, trying to drive the idea away, but Mr. Thompson ignored it instead. "Go sometimes," he remarked. "It's easy to forget." How crucial it is to have someone to talk to someone, to feel like someone else is truly. Listening, I couldn't understand it yet. The way he said it made me shudder. His comments stayed in the air long. Once he went, I dismissed it, saying myself, knowing it was only innocuous discourse, but the more Mr. Thompson come around, the more I observed. Minute variations in his actions. His praises, once naive, started to carry a weight I wasn't accustomed to, he would say, on my appearance and the degree of improvement in my care of myself, on the degree of maintenance I kept the place. First, I assumed he was merely being gentle, but soon it felt like he was spotting stuff nobody other did. One John left late on a business trip. It was a calm evening and I cuddled up. Seated on the couch reading from a book when the doorbell rang, I expected no one. I hesitated then to respond when there stood Mr. Thompson, opening the door. Grasping a smile, I was just in the neighborhood he mentioned for neighbors that I would stop to ensure everything was fine. I grinned, gently moving back to let him inside. Had grown usual for him to visit. Unannounced, so I gave it little thought. He entered the living room and we started chatting exactly as we usually did. But this time I experienced unusual conflict there was something about the air there, something like, his manner of looking at me made me uncomfortable. It was not anything obvious. Only a glance, but it was a lengthy glance, much to cause my heart to swell race as we discussed. Mr. Thompson sat nearer to me than normal. I could sense the space between us, declining, and the weight of his presence started to be more noticeable. "Remember embarrassing yourself laughing over something?" He mentioned, trying to dismiss the developing pain in my chest. I told myself that he was simply being friendly. I was exaggerating. But then, as though sensing my unease, Mr. Thompson leaned in slightly and laid a soft hand on the couch arm. He mentioned one does not often meet someone like you, someone that truly pays attention, someone who really loves the words, appeared harmless. Enough, but he had something in mind, toned something in his manner of speaking, made my skin crawl. I wanted to get away. Distant to inform him I was uneasy, but instead I started to chuckle tensely. I drew my legs up to my chest in search of to establish some gap separating us, even if it were merely physical. Mr. Thompson saw the change. In my stance for a second, there was stillness between us. He glanced at me, his gentle eyes, yet there was a sharpness. Behind them, for which I was unable disregard, I meant not to bring you difficult. He answered with his voice low. "I just wanted to let you know that you're valued. You're a rather unique individual. Sarah's manner of saying my name made my breath catches my heart, hammered in my chest, and I wasn't sure how to answer. Aimed to express something, anything to release the pressure, but I couldn't locate. The phrases seemed to be trapping me in the instant, frozen in place. Before I could say anything, Mr. Thompson got up. "Properly, I should let you return to your evening," he reported, smiling once more, although the smile had an unusual quality. "Anything I couldn't locate, just desired. To follow up to ensure you're good." Nodded, my throat dry, and watched him as he departed the house. When the door closed behind, I inhaled a breath I wasn't sure I knew. Having been seated there, fixating on the door leading what seemed to be an eternity, attempting to organize what had just happened, I had never felt so torn. In my life, part of me yearned to tell Adam what had been happening, but another part of me was too humiliated, too terrified of what he could believe I wanted not to produce issues. I wanted no part in creating for him, disbelieve me, or worse, makes him enraged. But the more I gave it some thought, the more came to see I couldn't overlook the manner Mr. Thompson was causing me to believe it wasn't right. Hence, I wanted not to support it. Yet, I couldn't get rid of the sense that his visits contained more than just what was expected. Letting on what I ought to have done as the days went by, Mr. Thompson's visitations become increasingly frequent every time he arrived, and sensed same level of discomfort, and discomfort I tried to dismiss, but it was growing more difficult to overlook. There was something about him made my pulse change. Quicken, and I puzzled myself about why I knew I had to use caution not to let things spiral out of control, yet I also understood that something deep within was changing. I simply knew not yet how far down. Days became weeks, and it would go like this. The conflict Mr. Thompson and I had just grew. I hadn't told Adam about the peculiar contacts with our part of me worried about landlord, since he wouldn't comprehend, or worse, that he would have get enraged and disappointed with me. After all, I was really attempting to be friendly. Was not. It was just little conversation, nothing more. Correct that I told myself every day. Mr. Thompson visited the house at time, trying to dismiss my unannounced brushing off mounting concern, yet the discomfort was not something I could readily overlook now. I kept having thoughts about the manner Mr. Thompson had studied me, the way he had leaned on the couch's armrest. Throughout that one visit, as though he were aimed at establishing a link that went beyond simple landlord or neighbourliness. Tenant-linked, I would catch myself, repeatedly going back over the incident in my thoughts, each time the suspense rising. Inside Tuesday night was a calm one when I ended up by myself in the kitchen. Cutting dinner vegetables from the garden, loved cooking always, but tonight it seemed more of a task than a comfort. My ideas were elsewhere, and I unable to get rid of the impression that something was approaching. Happened. I was only beginning to season the chicken as soon as I heard the recognizable sound of the doorbell. My pulse skipped a beat. I sure peeked out the kitchen window, and sufficient there was Mr. Thompson standing at the door, his regular pleasant grin on face. I hadn't seen him in a few of days, and though I ought to have been relieved, I had an unusual knot in my stomach, brushed my hands on a towel. Drew a long breath and moved to the good evening, Sarah, Mr. Thompson remarked from the door. Happily as I opened it, hopefully not upsetting anything, not at all, I answered, stressing. I turned aside to let him in and grinned. He went right inside the house, as though the most natural thing to do. In the globe, he peered around, his eyes momentarily gravitating toward the kitchen, where I had been getting dinner ready. "Smells great in here," he said, his eyes lingering on the dinner I was. "You are rather the cook," nodded. Politely, not really sure how to reply. "It's only something basic for supper. Nothing unique, you constantly say," Mr. Thompson laughed. "But you have a way of even the most basic ideas. Seem fantastic." The remark was wonderful. I asked, but it felt strange leaving from. He lacked the compliments I had experienced, spoke with friends or even Adam. There was a weight to them, as though he were witnessing something in me that transcended mere the meal or the house. I felt myself in starting to get restless once more, but I attempted to push the mood gone, thanks. I brushed it off. "You are here, hence you need everything, I presume." To inquire about something, Mr. Tom Thompson's manner suggests. Changed slightly, he seemed to hesitate. Ahead of actually, I was wondering how I was doing. If we could pause for a moment, it has been not too long since we had an opportunity to have a correct chat I found unexpected. We had always made friendly greetings when he arrived, but we had never sat down for long talk. I realized he had been in the region a lot lately, but I hadn't expected him to want to delve deeper in conversation. Though I had a flash of anxiety, I nodded. "Nevertheless, sure we can sit down." I guided him to the living room, then pointed for him to curl up on the couch I sat across from him on the chair where I often yesterday, while Adam and I watched TV. There was an uncomfortable quiet preceded Mr. Thompson. Spoke once more using a more austere tone than I had heard it before. Before you know, he started gently. "I have lately been considering life a lot. Concerning the evolution of objects across time, it is simple enough to get caught up in today's daily schedule. To lose view of what truly important. I wasn't sure where he was headed with this. I get what you imply, but I said carefully. Sometimes life gets hectic and occasionally it's difficult to maintain awareness of what's significant." Mr. Thompson nodded, eyes closed. Seeing exactly from my perspective, but it's also crucially to keep in mind is occasionally we have to stand back and make sure we are really living, not only going by. That there was something about his movements, words that sent me shivers, yet I lacked knowledge on how to reply. I had no notion what he meant, and I wasn't sure I meant to. "Knowing Sarah," she whispered gently, leaning ahead only marginally. "I'm not sure how to clarify this, but I connected with you ever once I saw you, a unique link I have not been able to disregard. I'm not sure how often I have considered our talks the way you present yourself. You are an amazing gal, and difficult to define into language exactly how much I respect you." I felt my breath seize in my throat his. Though their statements were kind, they seemed like a confession, something on his manner of remarked. They caused my heart to rush, but not in a decent way. I felt imprisoned at once. Not sure how to respond. My mind flew for anything to say to help to diffuse the strain that was now evident in the room. "I'm not sure what to say," I whispered, my voice just above a whisper. "I value the comment Mr. Thompson made. Still, I'm married and have a husband I love rather very much." He seemed unconcerned by my words. Rather, he slanted back in his chair and looked at me for a second, his attitude illegible. "I understand," he said silently, his voice almost apathetic. I want to avoid making you miserable, Sarah, but I also don't wish to act as though I don't feel what I feel. His comments were like a shock of running through me. Electricity seemed like heard him say he respected me. Before, although this was different, there was something deeper in his eye, something more acute. I had a mix of anxiety and uncertainty inundates. This wasn't only a friendly landlord. Checking in more lately, this was another thing I wasn't sure how to manage. I wish not to create any issues between you and your husband, Mr. Tom went on, but I couldn't keep acting as though I lacked attraction to you. I had to let you know how I felt. Uncertain of what to say, I opened my mouth, but the terms wouldn't flow. Wanted not to damage him, but also wanted not to give him any misleading hope. What was I meant to do in this situation? How could I make him? Realize that I was married rather than not eager in doing anything different from of my connection to... At last, Adam inhaled deeply, my heart thumping in my chest. Mr. Tom, I said with much conviction, recognize that you are acting honestly, but I have to be upfront with you. I am married, and I dedicate myself to my hubby. Thank you for your kind. Unfortunately, I'm not drawn in anything more than a tenant for a landlord relationship. There was a protracted silence, and I could see the letdown flickering through. From his perspective, he gazed down at his hands, then nodded. Slowly, I realize he stated silently, If I made you uncomfortable, apologies. That never was my aim. I nodded with a sensation of relief comes across me. Releasing the strain between us seems to vanish, but it left underlying a residual discomfort. I couldn't stir the belief that things would never be the same going forward, that Mr. Tom would be feeling for me would still remain regardless of my acknowledgement. He rose up and I followed him or not. Thank you for listening in, he said. Suitable, his voice still gentle but with a trace of melancholy. I'll leave you to your evening. Kindly know that I value your limits. Sarah, I simply wanted you to know how I felt. I pushed a grin, trying to cover the still simmering discomfort inside. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I mentioned I'll see you about. As he left the door, I stayed there for a time, fixed on the vacant area he had been in. Thoughts were a whirl I couldn't control. Believe what has lately transpired, I was wed Adam, and yet I had just had this interaction with our landlord. What was under progress, and why did it feel like all throughout the planet was gradually I shook my head in attempt to undo. Distance the uncertainty I had to pay attention to from my life beside Adam to recall the love and dedication we both possessed. Just a minor irritable nudge. Deeply felt inside told me that this was far from finished after that talk with Mr. Thompson. I sought to shove the whole circumstances out of my awareness. I didn't want that influencing my relationship with Adam, and I most surely wanted to avoid adding complexity to matters with our landlord anymore, because even though I hid my emotions, they never go away with the uncertainty and guilt. Stayed, and I discovered I was always second-guessing the interaction. Few days later, Mr. Thompson popped up out of nowhere once more. My heart constricted within my chest upon I heard the doorbell. Not ready for still another difficult exchange, but I knew I had to approach it squarely and opened the door, making attempts to maintain my "Hello, Sarah." He greeted me with composure, voice gentle but wary. I just wanted to see in and ensure everything is still excellent with the house. I nodded, requiring a "everything is good, Mr. Thompson" smile. I appreciate you asking. He appeared to stop before carrying on. I have been considering a lot about what I should said last time. I wanted not to offend you. Awkward, I grasp your limits, and I value that I just didn't want to part with stuff. Unspoken, I stared at him for a protracted length of time, experiencing the weight of his words. Said I had to be strict, as just now there was no room of space for thanks for your understanding of uncertainty. I answered, however, I should be clear I'm married. My main attention is on my marriage with Adam, and I refuse any kind of diversion. I appreciate our working rapport, yet that's where it endings. Mr. Thompson's expression softened still. There was a faint melancholy in, with slow acceptance. His eyes remarks without opposition. I can understand, he said softly. I apologize for overstepping. I inhaled deeply, experiencing a sensation of relief. It's good. I just wanted to make sure we agree, as he provided a little courteous nod and turned to go. I stood in the door as he turned away, observing him leave, experiencing a range of feelings that make me depressed, since it has to come to this. But another area was glad I had at last set the limitations I needed that evening. Adam and I sat down. For the first time during supper, and even though I felt really in the moment the occurrences of, though the past weeks tormented me, I knew that I had to go ahead and have emphasize what really important for my family. Dedication to Adam, and the affection we shared everything in good order, Adam asked. Seeing I was quieter than usual, I grinned, trying to drive the residual aside, ideas aside, simply thinking it's having you home makes me grin, back gripping my hand. It's lovely to be home. At that same instant I understood that no, considering the complexity or the uncertainty of human feelings, my first concern was unambiguous. I had to guard the bond I had. With Adam, I was not allowing anything. Then anyone gets in the way of it, and I knew not matter what we would overcome, taken together,